"Sir, you'll need to order something or give the table to a paying customer." The elderly man looked up from the menu, but his eyes did not quite focus on Delphine Ward standing over him. "I only need a few more minutes," he said. Delphine folded her arms. The Grayson and Fern would fill up soon with the morning crowd, and the old man had been sitting alone at table 9 for nearly an hour without ordering anything. A faded wool coat hung loose from his shoulders. One trembling hand rested on a small tin box he had set beside the menu. "This isn't a warming shelter, sir," Delphine said quietly. "I'm asking you to leave." At the next table, Marlowe Quinn lifted her head. 29 years old, a single mother, just off an overnight industrial cleaning shift, the smell of solvent still in her hair. That morning her bank card had been declined once before. She paid with loose change, scraped out of her glove compartment. On the table in front of her sat a single egg sandwich, her first meal in 19 hours. Marlowe knew that feeling. The feeling of walking out of a place while pretending the humiliation doesn't hurt. 14 months ago, she had walked out of a much taller building carrying 9 years of her life in a cardboard box, and no one had called after her. The old man slowly pushed back his chair. "I understand," he told Delphine, his voice carrying no anger, only the exhaustion of a man used to being asked to leave. He buttoned his coat with unsteady fingers, held the tin box against his chest, and turned toward the door. Marlowe watched him take one slow step, then another. Then she heard her own voice. "Sir." The old man stopped. Marlowe pulled the empty chair out from her table. "You can sit with me." He looked at her for a long moment, longer than seemed normal, as if he were trying to remember something, or trying to forget it. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." What Marlowe didn't know was that the old man had been looking for her for 4 months, and 3 blocks away, the man who had destroyed her life was preparing to walk into that very room. If this story touched you, leave a like so we know you're still listening. Share it with someone who has ever had to walk out of a room in silence. Sometimes they just need to know that somebody, somewhere, pulled out a chair. And don't forget to subscribe, because next week we'll tell you another story about empty chairs. Delphine didn't move. "He hasn't ordered anything," she said, lowering her voice just enough that only the 3 of them could hear. Marlowe didn't look at her. She was pulling the chair straight for the old man to sit down. "He's sitting at a table that's already been paid for," Marlowe said. Delphine opened her mouth, then closed it again. 2 customers at the counter had turned their heads toward them. She stepped back, and in that retreat something hardened in her eyes, something Marlowe had seen often enough to recognize. The old man lowered himself into the chair slowly, as though it might disappear beneath him if he sat down too quickly. He placed the tin box on the table beside his right elbow and kept 3 fingertips resting on the lid. For the rest of that morning, he wouldn't let his hand leave it for more than a few seconds at a time. Marlowe picked up the table knife, cut the egg sandwich in half, then took the small plate meant for sugar and used it as a second plate. She placed the larger half on it and pushed it toward him. He didn't look down. He was staring out the window, toward the place where a bus had just stopped and pulled away. "I'm not hungry," he said. "Neither am I," Marlowe said. "But it'll get cold." He turned back and looked down at the plate. Then he looked at hers, and Marlowe knew exactly what that look was calculating, because she had once sat on the other side of it. She pushed her own plate toward the middle of the table, so he could see that the difference between the 2 portions wasn't very large. It was the smallest lie she had ever told, and the one she regretted least. He picked up his fork. "Everett Blackwood," he said. "Marlowe." He nodded, took a small bite, and chewed for a long time. "I used to be a city building inspector. 31 years. I've been retired for 8. He said it the way a person presented identification. Not to boast, but to prove that he wasn't some nameless stranger who had just been driven away from a table. Marlowe understood, and felt something pull softly inside her chest. "You should eat," she said. "I have an afternoon shift, and I need to sleep before it, so I always eat fast." Everett ate. After 3 bites, he stopped, set down his fork, and looked toward table 9, the table he had just been told to leave, where a young married couple was now sitting. He stared at it longer than an empty table deserved to be stared at. "My son used to sit at that exact table," he said. Marlowe said nothing. This was the place where people usually asked a question immediately, and she had learned long ago that the next question was almost always the wrong one. She didn't ask where his son was now. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't say that everything happened for a reason, The sentence people had said to her 3 times during the first 2 weeks after she lost her job, and all 3 times she had pressed her fingernails into her palms to keep herself from answering. She simply reached for the tissue box at the edge of the table and pushed it closer to him. Everett looked at the tissues. Then he looked at her. He sat with his back to the door, he said. He said that way people couldn't watch him while he ate. He touched the lid of the tin box. He always ordered the blueberry pancakes here, even after he was old enough to know the pancakes here weren't very good. A breath escaped Marlowe, almost a laugh. They look good in the picture on the menu. That's exactly what he used to say. Everett smiled. The smile stayed on his face for perhaps 2 seconds, then collapsed into a breath. He raised a hand to his mouth. I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize. He sat quietly for a while. Beyond the glass, the November wind pushed a dry leaf along the sidewalk. Inside, the coffee machine hissed at the counter, and then went silent. Today is the 1st anniversary of his death, Everett said. Marlowe set down her fork. She didn't reach across to touch his hand, because she didn't know whether he was the kind of person who wanted to be touched. She only said, very softly, "Then today is a difficult day." Yes. He nodded several times, as though nodding helped keep everything in its proper place. People keep telling me the first year is the hardest. I think they say that to comfort themselves, not me. Marlowe didn't disagree, because she thought the same thing. Everett ate 2 more bites. Then he set down his fork again, and looked at her in a way that was entirely different from before, slower and more carefully, like a man comparing a face to something he carried in his memory. What did you say your name was again? Marlowe? And your last name? She shrugged. Quinn. The 3 fingertips resting lightly on the lid of the tin box tightened. Only a little. Just enough for the color to leave their tips. Marlowe didn't see it, because at that exact moment she was reaching for her glass of water. By the time she looked back, he had picked up his fork and was staring down at his plate, and there was nothing left on his face, except the weariness of an old man eating a breakfast someone else had given him. Quinn, he repeated, so quietly it was almost nothing but breath. Yes, sir. Everett nodded. He said nothing more. They ate for a while longer in comfortable silence. Then Everett lifted his head and drew in a breath, deep and deliberate, the kind of breath taken by someone inspecting something rather than simply breathing. He tilted his head toward the kitchen. Do you smell that? Marlowe stopped chewing. Smell what? Damp mortar. He spoke to her, not to anyone else in the diner. He didn't call for a server or ask for the manager. He spoke only to the woman sitting across from him. That smell isn't like ordinary dampness. Ordinary dampness smells musty. This is sharp, almost faintly sweet. That's the smell of water seeping into mortar for years and slowly eating into the steel inside. He looked up at the ceiling, toward the horizontal beam that ran from the kitchen wall out across the dining room. This building is dying. It's dying slowly, but it's dying. Marlowe set down her fork. She followed his gaze. A tea-colored stain had spread across the ceiling in an oval, darker around the outer edge than in the center. A stain like that didn't form in a month. She stood, walked 3 steps to the table beside the column in the corner, the one no one was using, took a quarter from her pocket, and balanced it upright on the tabletop with the tip of one finger. Then she let go. The coin remained still for half a second. Then it rolled. It rolled toward the column, slowly and steadily, without stopping or veering, until it reached the edge of the table and fell to the floor with a thin metallic clink. Marlowe didn't pick it up. She straightened and drew a small metal instrument from her breast pocket, no longer than the span of her hand, something she had carried every day for 7 years, and still couldn't break the habit of carrying even after no one paid her to do so anymore. She pressed it against the base of the column. She read the number. Then she pressed it against the column a second time, turned 90 degrees, and read it again. Mr. Blackwood, she said without turning around. You said 31 years? 31. Had you seen this 31 years ago? What would you have done? Everett didn't need to think. I would have closed off this section within 10 minutes. That was when Delphine approached. She had been watching from the counter ever since Marlowe left her seat, and now she came toward them with both hands clasped behind her back, carrying herself like someone about to put an end to something. What are you doing to our table? The floor slopes in this corner, Marlowe said. It slopes enough for a quarter to roll on its own. There's an old water stain on the ceiling near the kitchen beam. You need to move the customers out from beneath that beam and call a licensed structural engineer today. Delphine looked her up and down. Marlo knew exactly where that gaze stopped. It stopped on the gray night shift uniform she hadn't had time to change out of, on her rubber-toed shoes, and on the name of the industrial cleaning company embroidered across her chest in faded red thread. "This building was built in 1927, Delphine said. "It's been leaning since before you were born. Old floors slope evenly. This one slopes toward a single point." "What qualifications do you have?" Delphine asked. "To diagnose our building from beside a table." 7 years in structural safety inspection. State certification. Class 2. Delphine nodded slowly, a very thin smile resting on her lips. "And now?" Marlo stood still. That wasn't a question. It was an answer spoken in the shape of one, and she had heard it so many times that it no longer stung. It only made her tired. Now she cleaned factory floors from 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. Now she repaired washing machines in apartment basements for $40 a visit. Now people looked at the uniform and decided that losing her old job proved she had never deserved it in the first place. "Now I'm telling you that people are sitting beneath that beam," Marlo said. Another voice cut in from the counter. "I can climb up and take a look." The young server named Sadie Kovash had somehow already pulled a folding ladder from the storage room. Delphine spun around. "Sadie, get back to work." "It'll only take 2 minutes." I said no. Sadie had already opened the ladder. She climbed 4 steps, reached toward the steel plate where the beam met the wall, and remained silent for about 5 seconds. Then she spoke, and her voice had changed. "Delphine, I can turn this bolt with my hand." Chairs scraped across the floor. One customer seated near the kitchen stood first, and then everyone at that table stood with him. Delphine said nothing. Sadie climbed down, her hand coated in rust-colored powder. "The wall around the plate is soft. It gives when I press it." Marlo didn't look at Delphine triumphantly. She didn't say a single word about being right. She only spoke in the calm, level voice of someone who had done this work for 7 straight years. "Move the customers away from beneath the beam. Write down the time, including the time Sadie inspected it. Take photographs of the plate before anyone touches it again. Then call a licensed engineer. Don't call a repairman. Call an engineer." Delphine stood there for another 2 seconds. Then she turned to Sadie and said sharply, "Clear tables, 4, 6, and 7. Marlo returned to her seat. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she hated that. Everett remained exactly as he had been, 3 fingertips resting on the lid of the tin box, and he had watched her from beginning to end without saying a word. "You know what that cracking sound means?" he said. Marlo shook her head. "I know what it could mean. There's a difference." "Is it a big difference?" "It's everything," she said. "A warning sign tells you to stop and investigate. It doesn't give you the right to guess." The bell above the door rang. 2 men entered first, not at the same time but half a beat apart, and instead of walking into the middle of the diner, they split off to opposite sides. One stopped beside the doorframe, the other went straight to the far end of the room, then turned and took up position there. Neither man looked at anyone. Both wore dark coats, and neither removed his. Then the third man walked in. Marlo didn't know who he was, but she understood at once what was happening inside that room, because the conversations faded and then stopped altogether. Not all at once, but from table to table like water drawing back from the shore, and the silence left behind wasn't the silence of curiosity. It was the kind of silence made by people who knew they ought to keep quiet. The man was about 34 years old. He didn't walk quickly. He didn't look around for a place to sit, glance up at the menu board, or make any of the small movements of someone entering a place for the first time. He walked straight ahead, as though he were moving through his own home, toward table 9, where the young couple had hurriedly risen and stepped away, then stopped and turned his head to search. He found Everett. "Mr. Blackwood." Everett set down his fork. "Mr. Solano, the car was late. I'm sorry." He said it plainly, as a genuine apology, with nothing else beneath it. "Waybosset Street has 2 lanes blocked. I should have accounted for it." Marlo heard a cup strike its saucer too hard near the counter. She turned and saw Delphine standing frozen, one hand still resting on the register, her face so pale that the powder on it was plainly visible. Delphine wasn't looking at the man. She was staring at the black and white photograph hanging on the wall behind the counter. The photograph Marlo had eaten breakfast beneath more times than she could count, without ever reading the words printed below it. The picture showed a small storefront, with a man standing in front of it, taken sometime in the 1960s. Beneath it, in gold lettering, were the words, Solano Holdings, owner of the Grayson and Fern chain since 1964. Rafe Solano didn't sit down. He looked around the diner once and saw the 3 displaced tables, the folding ladder still standing beside the wall, and the stain on the ceiling. "Who's managing this shift?" Delphine stepped forward. "I am, sir. Delphine Ward, Miss Ward." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Preserve all security footage from 6 o'clock this morning onward. Don't overwrite it. Don't edit it." "Yes, sir." "Preserve the maintenance log for this location. The paper copy, not the digital entry." "Yes, sir." "Pull every building repair invoice from the past 3 years. Every service call, including the ones that weren't approved for payment." Delphine swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Close off the area beneath that beam. No one sits there, and no one moves those tables back until a licensed engineer has stood beneath it and signed off." "Yes, sir." 4 times. Rafe turned toward the ladder. "Who climbed up?" Sadie raised her hand halfway, then lowered it again. "I did." "Did anyone tell you not to climb?" Sadie looked at Delphine, then down at the floor. She said nothing. It was the clearest answer she could have given. Rafe nodded once. "You climbed after being told not to. Thank you." Sadie looked up, unable to believe what she had heard. Delphine stood motionless. Rafe walked to Everett's table and pulled out a chair, but the old man had already risen, holding the tin box against his chest. Rafe's gaze moved across the table, over the 2 plates, over the small sugar dish being used as a plate with half an untouched egg sandwich resting on it, and he paused there for exactly half a second. Then he looked at the woman in the night shift uniform standing beside the table. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask who she was, or why she had been the one telling the manager what needed to be done about a beam. What he looked at was the object in her hand, the small metal tool no longer than the span of her palm, which she was still holding because she hadn't yet had time to return it to her pocket. He knew what it was. He had seen one in the hands of dozens of people, across dozens of his construction sites. What he didn't understand was why someone wearing the uniform of an industrial cleaning company had brought a pocket inclinometer into a breakfast diner at 7 o'clock in the morning. He didn't ask. He simply left the question inside his mind, in the place where he kept things that didn't belong where he had found them. "Mr. Blackwood, the car is waiting," he said. Everett turned to Marlowe. He stood there longer than necessary, still holding the tin box against his chest, and Marlowe thought he was about to say something more. But all he said was, "Thank you for breakfast." "It was nothing, sir." "It wasn't," he said. Then he left. She watched until the door closed behind him and the black car outside pulled away. Inside the diner, conversation began to return, quietly at first and then steadily louder, and Delphine was making a phone call in the corner by the counter, in a voice Marlowe had never heard her use before. Marlowe sat down, looked at the remaining half of the sandwich on her plate, and finished it. Then she went out to her car. She sat behind the wheel for a while with both hands resting in her lap, waiting for them to stop trembling. Her phone showed 8% battery. She opened her messages and typed to the neighbor who watched June in the mornings. "Tell June Mom will be home in time for her story." Then she started the engine. The black car dropped Everett in front of a row of 2-story houses on the west side of the city, and he walked 17 steps from the curb to the door, because he had counted those steps often enough to know exactly when to take out his key. The apartment he rented was on the ground floor, 1 room, with a window overlooking the place where the garbage cans were kept. He had moved there 8 months earlier, after selling the house where he and his wife had lived for 41 years, because the cost of her medicine during her final years and the expenses for Hollis had taken most of what he had. He hadn't told anyone that. He set the tin box on the dining table, took off his coat, hung it over the back of a chair, then sat down and looked at the box for a long time. Then he opened the lid. He didn't open it all the way. He lifted it only about 2 finger joints, slipped his hand inside, and pulled out a sheet of paper folded into quarters, worn thin along the creases. He closed the lid at once. The paper was a page from a technical notebook, ruled with tiny squares, the writing done in black ballpoint ink, the neat, slanted hand of someone accustomed to taking notes while standing. Hollis's handwriting. On it was a list of names, 11 of them, each one followed by a title and a date. 10 names had been crossed out. The 11th had been circled twice in red ink, and beside it were 3 words written in haste. Fired. Wouldn't sign. The name was Marlowe Quinn. Everett laid the paper on the table and smoothed it with the palm of his hand, though it was already flat. 4 months earlier, He had begun going to Grayson and Fern every Tuesday morning. Not because the place was close. It was 2 bus rides from where he lived. Not because the coffee was good. He went because, in his son's file, there was a note written in the margin. A line Hollis had probably written only to remind himself, and had never intended anyone else to read. Quinn eats breakfast at Grayson and Fern after the night shift, Tuesday mornings. Usually sits at the table by the window. That was all Everett had. No address, no telephone number, no name of the company that employed her now. He had called directory assistants, searched the phone book, and spent 3 afternoons at the city library asking younger people to show him how to search online. There were 42 people named Quinn in the state. None of them was the person he needed, so he did the only thing a 71-year-old man could do. He went to that diner on Tuesday mornings, sat down, and waited. He ordered 1 cup of coffee each time, the cheapest one, and stayed until people began looking at him. 17 Tuesday mornings. He didn't know what she looked like. He knew only 3 things. She was a woman, her name was Quinn, and she worked the night shift. He had mistaken 4 different people for her. Once, he had stood up to question a woman in work clothes, then sat back down when he saw her wedding ring and the 2 children with her, because he thought he had no right to bring this into a family that was living in peace. That morning, he had almost decided not to go. It was the 1st anniversary of Hollis's death, and he had planned to stay home. But he couldn't bear being inside those 4 walls on a day like that, so he took the 2 buses anyway, sat down at table number 9, the table where his son had once sat, and ordered nothing, because he had $40 left in his wallet for the entire week, and he had already spent $3 on coffee during each of the previous 17 Tuesday mornings. Then the woman at the next table called him back and pulled out a chair. Then she cut her breakfast in half, pushed the larger portion toward him, and lied that she wasn't hungry. Then she said her name was Quinn, and Everett Blackwood, who had spent 4 months searching for that name, sat there with a piece of bread in his mouth and couldn't make himself speak. He had come to ask for her help. He had prepared his opening words and practiced them so many times on the bus that he knew them by heart. "Miss Quinn, I'm Hollis Blackwood's father. I need you to listen to me for 10 minutes. But when he finally found her, she was hungry, she was tired, her hair still smelled of chemicals, and she was feeding him. He couldn't open his mouth, not because he was afraid, because he was ashamed, because he suddenly understood that what he was about to place on the table wasn't a request. It was a burden, and the person he intended to place it upon was already carrying too much. Everett sat there a while longer. Outside, a garbage truck backed up with a series of beeps, then went silent. Then he reached for his telephone, an old flip phone, and dialed a number he had saved 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks before, he had written a letter by hand and mailed it to the headquarters of Solano Holdings, and he hadn't expected anyone to answer. But 3 days later, someone called him back, and the caller wasn't a secretary. The man said, briefly, that he would meet with him, and his voice made it perfectly clear that he had agreed to the meeting not because he believed Everett. He had agreed because he was curious. The phone rang twice. Rafe Solano. Everett looked at the name circled on the table. "It's Blackwood." "Did you make it home, sir?" "I did." He drew a breath. "Mr. Solano, the woman who sat at the table with me this morning." The other end of the line went silent. "Her name is in my son's file," Everett said. "The only name that was circled." Still silence. "This morning she shared her bread with me," Everett said, without knowing who I was. Rafe ended the call and sat perfectly still. His office was on the 11th floor, with glass running the length of one wall and looking down over the place where the container cranes stood motionless along the docks. He didn't look out at them. He looked down at the desktop, at the place where his hand was resting, and thought about a small metal bar in the hand of a woman wearing an industrial cleaning uniform. He pressed the intercom button. "Talia, come up here." Talia Reyes came in 15 minutes later, carrying a thin file and a recorder she always placed on the table whether she turned it on or not. She had been his personal attorney for 6 years, and before that, she had worked in the district attorney's office. She was the only person in the building who dared tell him he was wrong, without lowering her voice. "We have a name," she said. "Marlo Quinn, 29 years old. Tell me. Joined Solano Holdings at 22, Structural Safety Inspection Division. 7 years. Second-class state certification. Renewed on time all 7 times. Talia turned a page. Not one safety violation. Not one recorded instance of tardiness. Every annual performance review placed her in the upper tier. Promoted twice, the second time to lead technician when she was 26. The recommendation was signed by the former division head. He retired last year. Rafe said nothing. Disciplinary record, Talia continued. Exactly once in 7 years. One written warning. Issued 11 days before she was terminated. Reason? Refusal to sign a structural acceptance report. Harbor Row project. Rafe looked up. And 11 days later? Employment terminated. The stated reason in the decision was insubordination and failure to support management direction. Talia placed the file on the desk and turned it toward him. Read that reason carefully. It isn't a casual phrase. It's the kind of phrase that makes every construction company in this state automatically reject a background file without calling to ask a single additional question. Rafe read it. Who handled it? That's what I want you to look at. Talia turned to the last page and pushed it toward him. The final page was the personnel approval form. There were 2 signature boxes. The one on the left, under submitted by, read Corbin Ashgrove, Vice President of Project Development. The one on the right was under approved by. Rafe looked down. It was his own signature. He didn't pick up the paper. He didn't say anything either, for so long that Talia had to turn toward the window so she wouldn't have to look at his face. Rafe knew exactly which day it had been. September 19th, 14 months earlier. He knew because that week he had been at Rhode Island Hospital from morning until late at night, and he had only returned to the office in the late afternoon to sign whatever people told him had to be signed. His mother was on the 4th floor. She hadn't been able to speak since Monday. Corbin came to the hospital 3 times that week, each time carrying a case of documents, and each time saying the same thing. That Rafe didn't need to read them, that they were only formalities, that he should just sign so everything could keep moving while he took care of his mother. Rafe had signed. He didn't remember what he had signed. He remembered the smell of disinfectant in the 4th floor corridor, and he remembered the sound of the ventilator. But he didn't remember a single line from any document he had touched that week. Do you remember? Talia asked. No. Did you read it? No. Talia gave one small nod, and there was no pity in her expression, because she knew he wouldn't have been able to bear it. Then you need to understand where this stands legally. A signature is a signature. Before the board, before a court, before anyone. The person who terminated Marlo Quinn's employment was you, not Corbin. Rafe finally lifted the page. He held it at eye level and studied his own handwriting. The signature his father had made him practice 3 times when he was 12, because he said a man's signature was the one thing no one could take from him. What about Harbor Row? He asked. I've only given it a preliminary look. An 11-story waterfront project. Turned over 1 year and 2 months ago. Currently occupied. The acceptance file is complete, with an engineer's signature and an official seal. On the surface, it's clean. On the surface. I didn't say it was clean. I said it looks clean. Talia picked up the recorder. Rafe, I need you to hear this before you do anything else. You want to reopen a personnel file bearing your own signature, tied to a project overseen by Corbin. You understand what that means inside this building, don't you? Say it. Your father died in prison 4 years ago. His shares didn't transfer directly to you. They're held in the family trust until the trust dissolves in April of next year. You're running this company, but on a 7-seat board, you control only 2. Rafe set the page down. I know. You know, but you tend to forget when you're angry. Talia stood. Corbin's hold over the other 3 seats is stronger than you think. If you go after Harbor Row the way other men in your family would, you'll lose everything you've spent 8 years building. If you go after it through documents, then you need to be certain of every single page. She reached the door, then stopped. Do you want me to pull the entire Harbor Row file? Rafe was still looking at his signature. Pull everything, he said. And Talia, don't tell anyone I asked. That afternoon, Marlo was lying face down beneath an industrial washing machine in the basement of an apartment building on Broad Street, when her phone vibrated in her back pocket. She let it ring through once. Then it rang a second time, and she rolled out, wiped her hands on a rag, and answered. This is Rafe Solano. She sat up too quickly and struck her head against the edge of the machine. Yes. The engineer arrived at the diner at 11 o'clock this morning. He was there for 3 hours. Rafe didn't say hello or ask how she was. The beam anchor plate has lost roughly 40% of its load-bearing capacity. Water from a pipe on the floor above has been leaking for months. He said that if it were left that way, then 3 to 5 weeks. Marlowe said nothing. Miss Quinn? I'm listening. He also said that whoever found it had read the signs correctly, without touching a single thing. Rafe paused. I've closed the premises until the reinforcement work is complete. Marlowe looked down at her oil-stained hands. That's good. I also know you used to work for me. She said nothing. The water pump in the corner of the basement started running, then shut off. Miss Quinn. Yes. This morning, you stood in my diner and told my manager what needed to be done. You didn't mention the 7 years you spent at my company. Why? Because you were worried about an old man who had just lost his son. That isn't an answer. It's the answer I have, Marlowe said. Rafe was silent long enough for her to hear papers turning at the other end of the line. I want to meet with you. For what? To hear what happened at Harbor Row. Marlowe stood. She walked 3 steps toward the foot of the stairs, where there was light, and stood there for a moment. For the past 14 months, she had avoided everything bearing the Solano name. She had changed her route to work so she wouldn't have to pass that building. Once, she had seen someone from her old department standing in line at a grocery store, and she had left her basket behind and walked out. Will your attorney be there? She asked. Yes. Will there be a recorder? Yes. Where? My attorney's office, not headquarters. Marlowe looked up at the light spilling through the ventilation window. I'm free Thursday morning before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Talia Reyes's office was on the 3rd floor of an old building in Fox Point, and Marlowe arrived 10 minutes early, wearing the cleanest shirt she owned. Talia began with exactly 1 sentence, spoken directly into the recorder. This is an information verification meeting. It isn't a job offer. It isn't an agreement. And it isn't a promise to amend your record. You may stop at any time. Marlowe nodded. I understand. Rafe sat at the far end of the table and said nothing for the first 20 minutes. Talia started from the beginning. Harbor Row, 11 stories. A waterfront apartment complex. Construction begun 3 years earlier. Marlowe had been assigned to oversee structural inspections from the 3rd floor upward. Where did the problem begin? Talia asked. With a shipment of reinforcing steel, Marlowe said. The design specified a particular material code. What arrived at the site carried a different code, a cheaper one. Did you say it was dangerous? No. Marlowe shook her head. I never said that. That's what people claimed I said later. Talia looked up. Then what did you say? I said I didn't know. That's exactly what I said. Marlowe placed both hands on the table. Substituting a material doesn't automatically mean the structure will fail. Sometimes the replacement still meets the standard. But once you change the material, the old load testing data is no longer valid. It proves only the performance of the material that was removed from the site. What about new load testing data? They ran tests, but there weren't enough cycles, and they were conducted over 3 dry days, with only 4 degrees of temperature variation. The results showed deviation. It wasn't large, but the deviation moved in one direction, instead of appearing randomly. Rafe spoke for the first time. What did you recommend? Marlowe turned toward him. 2 choices. One was to replace it with the material specified in the design. The other was to keep the substitute material, but run a complete load test continuously, for 72 hours, through the full range of temperature cycles. And then I would sign. That was all? That was all, she said. I didn't ask for the project to be stopped. I didn't ask for anyone to be disciplined. I asked for 3 days. What answer did you receive? Talia asked. Marlowe looked down at the table. Mr. Ashgrove told me the building already had a publicly announced sales launch date, and that I was turning a technical question into a display of moral righteousness. No one in the room spoke. Talia opened her computer and turned the screen around. This is the final document in the project file. The acceptance report bearing your name. Marlowe pulled her chair closer. She read the heading. She read the body. Then she read the conclusion, and Talia saw clearly the moment her face went rigid, not with anger, but like someone who had missed a step in the dark. This isn't my report, Marlowe said. Rafe sat straighter. Are you certain? The format is mine. The figures in the middle are mine. The concluding statement isn't. She pointed at the screen without touching it. I wrote that the stable data obtained was insufficient to demonstrate that the system could withstand full operational loads. This says the observed deviation fell within the expected limits of construction conditions. Talia wrote 2 words in her notebook. Did you revise it? No. Did you authorize anyone else to revise it? No. Did you sign this version? Marlo raised her eyes and looked directly at Rafe. Look for yourself. Is my signature there? It wasn't. The space had been left blank. Talia printed the acceptance report, marked it with the date and time, placed it in a separate file folder, and wrote 3 words across the front. Then she looked at Rafe and waited. He didn't look at her. He was looking at Marlo. Miss Quinn, he said, what did it cost you? Marlo raised her eyes. That isn't part of the technical record. No. Rafe kept looking at her. But it is part of the truth. Marlo sat still. She had rehearsed this story in her mind many times, usually at 3 o'clock in the morning while she cleaned the second-floor corridor of a printing plant and had nothing else to think about but the story itself. But she had never spoken it aloud to anyone, not even the neighbor who watched June, not even her sister in Ohio, because every time she tried, it sounded like a complaint. She hated hearing herself complain. I lost my health insurance first, she said. It expired after 30 days. I paid to continue it myself for 1 month. Then I stopped, because that 1 month cost as much as 2 weeks of groceries. Talia wrote it down. Marlo continued. I sold the pickup truck. It was old, but it was the most valuable thing I owned. I sold it in the 7th week to pay that month's rent, and the month after. Where did you apply? Talia asked. 41 places. Marlo gave the number without pausing, because she knew it exactly. For the first 3 months, I applied only to construction companies and inspection firms, because that was the work I knew how to do. I was called for 9 interviews. 7 times, they called back after checking my employment history and said the position had been filled. Rafe asked in a low voice, Do you know why? Yes. Marlo looked directly at him. Because of the phrase in the termination decision, insubordination and failure to support management direction. In this field, nobody asks what that phrase means. They see it and set the application aside. If they had written that I made a technical error, I could have challenged it. But you can't challenge this, because it doesn't say what I did wrong. It only says I'm the kind of person who's difficult to employ. Talia stopped writing. Rafe said nothing. By the 5th month, I stopped applying to construction companies, Marlo said. I took a night shift with an industrial cleaning company, 10 at night until 6 in the morning. During the day, I repaired washing machines, dryers, and water pumps for old apartment buildings. $40 a job, sometimes 30. Do you still live in the same place? Talia asked. No. I moved to a smaller apartment on the north side in the 8th month. Marlo said it calmly, then added something more, and her voice changed slightly. June likes the new place better. Her bedroom window looks out at a maple tree. In the fall, the red leaves fill the whole window. She stands there and counts them. Rafe asked, and he asked slowly, Does June know? She knows her mother changed jobs. That's all? That's all. Marlo sat straighter. She's 6 years old. She knows her mother works at night now and sleeps during the day. She knows our home has a maple tree. She doesn't need to know anything else. You don't think she'll ask why? She did ask. Once. Marlo paused. She asked whether I liked my new job. I told her I liked the night shift because the streets were empty and I didn't have to wait at red lights when I drove. She said that sounded nice. Then she went to draw. Marlo gave a small shrug. I won't turn my daughter into an audience for a battle between adults. That battle is mine. She didn't ask for a part in it. The only sound left in the room was the recorder running. Talia looked down at her notebook and wrote nothing more, because she had already written enough. Rafe sat silent for a long time. He was thinking about a sheet of paper in his desk drawer, the one with 2 signature boxes, and he knew that if he spoke now, everything in the room would change direction, and he wouldn't get the final part of the story. He also knew that was a convenient way to think about it, and that the real reason he remained silent had nothing to do with strategy. It was because he hadn't yet found the courage. Miss Quinn, he said at last. Yes. If I gave you those exact 3 days of load testing again, today, would you sign? Marlo looked at him as though the question made no sense. If the data met the standard, I would sign. If it didn't, I wouldn't. Even if signing was the way to get your career back? Especially then, she said. Rafe nodded once, very slowly. Talia turned off the recorder, wrote down the ending time, and said she would send Marlo a copy of the transcript within 2 days. Marlo stood, thanked them, and walked toward the door. She stopped at the threshold. Mr. Solano. Yes. That diner that morning. You closed it, didn't you? I did. What about the employees? They're still being paid, aren't they? Rafe looked at her. Over the past 14 months, this woman had lost her insurance, her truck, her profession, and even her name within the industry, and the final question she asked him was about the wages of people she had met on a single morning. They're still being paid, he said. Then that's good, she said, and she left. Rafe remained in Talia's office for another 40 minutes after Marlowe left. Talia didn't ask what he was thinking. Before he went, she said only one thing, that he should tell her soon, because the longer something like this was left alone, the harder it became to untangle, and that a lawyer would tell him that for legal reasons, but she was telling him for another reason entirely. Rafe didn't answer. 2 days later, on Saturday afternoon, a black car stopped in front of a 4-story building on the north side of the city, where a maple tree stood close against the wall. Rafe went upstairs alone. He told his 2 men to remain with the car, and he didn't bring Talia. No lawyer, no recorder, no witnesses. Marlowe opened the door with Flower still clinging to both hands. She looked at him, then looked past his shoulder to see whether anyone else was there. And only then did she step into the hallway and close the door behind her. June is inside, she said. I understand, Rafe said. Can we sit in the courtyard? The rear courtyard had only 1 wooden table and 2 benches, the paint peeling from the tabletop. They sat across from each other. Rafe placed a craft envelope on the table, took out a sheet of paper, and turned it toward her. He laid it face up, with the 2 signature boxes facing her. You asked who fired you, he said. You asked that question 9 times during the meeting the other day, one way or another. This is the answer. Marlowe looked down. She read the stated reason, the line she had memorized so completely that she no longer needed to read it. Then her eyes moved to the 2 boxes at the bottom of the page. The box on the left, submitted by Corbin Ashgrove. The box on the right, approved by. She stared at it for a very long time, long enough for a maple leaf to fall onto the table between them without either of them picking it up. It wasn't Corbin, Rafe said. He only submitted it. I was the one who signed. Marlowe didn't lift her head. September 19th. Yes, I remember that day, she said. They called me into Human Resources at 9:15. There was a security guard standing at the door. I asked him whether he had to be there, and he said it was procedure. I packed my things in 20 minutes. I had worked there for 7 years, and I was finished in 20 minutes because I kept very little on my desk. She was still looking at the paper. All that week, I kept thinking someone higher up would read the decision and ask one question. Just one. She raised her eyes. You read it, didn't you? Rafe didn't look away. No. You didn't read it. No. Marlowe sat still. Something passed across her face that Rafe couldn't read, and he waited for it to become anger, because he had prepared himself for anger. He had spent the entire ride there arranging what he would say when she began to shout. But she didn't shout. She only pushed the paper back toward the middle of the table, slowly, as though it weighed more than a sheet of paper should. Then that's worse, she said. Rafe didn't understand at first. Would you say that again? Marlowe stood. She remained beside the table, flower still on both hands, and spoke in the same even voice she had used that morning in the diner, the voice of someone who had learned that speaking louder never helped anything. For the past 14 months, I kept thinking someone had sat down, read my file, weighed everything, and decided I wasn't worth keeping. I hated that thought, but I could live with it, because at least, in that version, I was still something. I was a decision. Someone had to think about me before throwing me away. She looked down at the paper. But this isn't that. No one thought anything at all. I was only one sheet in a stack of papers. Someone slipped it between the others, and you signed without looking, and 7 years of my life walked out the door with a cardboard box. Rafe didn't stand. He could have told her about the 4th floor of Rhode Island Hospital, about how his mother hadn't been able to speak since Monday, about how Corbin had come 3 times that week, and told him each time to keep signing so everything could continue moving. He could have said all of it, and every word would have been true. He opened his mouth, and before he spoke, he heard how it would sound in the ears of the woman standing across from him. It would sound like an excuse, and an excuse, placed beside 7 years, a sold pickup truck, and 41 applications, was the cheapest thing in the world. So he said the only thing that remained. That's right. Marlo blinked. You aren't going to explain? I have a reason, Rafe said. It's true, but it doesn't change anything for you. And if I tell you, the only thing it will do is make me feel better. I didn't come here to feel better. He tapped one fingertip lightly against the paper. You're right. I signed without reading it. That is my signature, not Corbin's. Marlo looked at him. Somewhere on the second floor, a door opened and closed. She glanced upward, and her entire posture changed, turning toward the stairs. I have to go inside, she said. The bread is still in the oven. I understand. She took 3 steps, then stopped. Mr. Solano. Yes. Are you going to do anything about Harbor Row? Yes. Because of me, or because of the building? Rafe picked up the paper, folded it, and returned it to the envelope. Because of both, he said. But if you're asking which comes first, it's the building. People are sleeping in there. Marlo gave one small nod. At least that part is true. Then she went upstairs, and he remained alone at the peeling table for a while longer, the envelope in his hand. He didn't call after her. He knew he had no right. The following Tuesday morning, Marlo came off the night shift at 6:10 and walked across the printing plant parking lot toward the 15-year-old car she had bought after selling her pickup truck. It was still dark. A car was parked across the exit with its headlights on, and when Marlo approached, the door opened. Delphine Ward stepped out. She was wearing a coat instead of her restaurant uniform, and she looked like someone who had been sitting in that car longer than necessary. You work here, Delphine said. Marlo stopped 2 steps away. How did you know I worked here? The name of the cleaning company was embroidered on your uniform. I called and asked whether they had anyone named Quinn. The person who answered said you worked the night shift at the printing plant. Delphine said it without the slightest embarrassment, as though tracking down a stranger at 6 o'clock in the morning were perfectly ordinary. I need to tell you something. Marlo waited. They took away my authority to manage shifts on Thursday. Delphine said, I'm still being paid, but they won't schedule me. I can't sign anything, and I'm not allowed into the back office. There's an internal review, and they told me it has to do with the way I handled a customer that morning. She looked directly at Marlo. You're making me lose my job. Marlo didn't answer at once. She studied Delphine, and what she saw wasn't entirely anger. There was fear in it. People only went looking for strangers at 6 in the morning when they were afraid. I've worked in the restaurant business for 12 years, Delphine continued, her voice beginning to move faster. I've managed that location for 4 years. I've never had a single line written against me. I have a mortgage, and I'm supporting my mother. You don't know anything about that. No, Marlo said. I don't, and yet you stood in the middle of my restaurant and told me what to do in front of my staff. I told you about the beam. You spoke to me in that tone. Delphine stepped 1 pace closer. Do you know what I remember most? You never raised your voice. You just kept speaking evenly, like you were dictating something for me to write down. In front of Sadie, in front of the customers. Marlo nodded slowly. You're right. I did speak in that tone. So you admit it. I admit I spoke in that tone, Marlo said. I don't admit that I should have stayed silent. Delphine gave a short laugh with no amusement in it. That building had been leaning long before I started working there. I reported the stain on the ceiling twice. Twice. Do you hear me? They sent someone to paint over it and wrote in the log that it had been handled. I did exactly what I was authorized to do. I believe you. Then why am I the one being reviewed? Delphine asked, the words coming out louder than she intended. Why not the person who approved the expense? Why not the person who refused to call an engineer? Me. The person who happened to be standing there that morning. Marlo was quiet for a moment. Across the parking lot, another worker opened a car door and drove away, the taillights sweeping across the 2 women before disappearing. Miss Ward, Marlo said. What exactly is the review about? The way I handled a customer. Which customer? Delphine didn't answer. Do you remember him? Marlo asked. The old man sitting at table number 9. He has a name. Everett Blackwood. He worked as a building inspector for this city for 31 years. That day was the first anniversary of his son's death. Delphine looked away. I didn't know that. No, Marlo said. You didn't, but you didn't ask either. Delphine turned back, and the anger in her face rose like a wall. You're standing there lecturing me about morality while you're wearing that uniform? Marlo looked down at her gray work clothes, then looked up again. She didn't answer that. She said something else instead. I used to think I lost my job because of someone else. Delphine stood still. I thought that for an entire year, Marlowe said. I kept a name ready in my mind, and I pulled it out whenever I was tired. It felt good to think that way. It gave me somewhere to put everything down. She raised her car keys. It turned out not to be true. Delphine opened her mouth. Then she closed it. What is that supposed to mean? It means I'm still finding out, Marlowe said. But when I did begin to find out, I learned that things weren't the way I had been telling them to myself for a year. Someone very high up did one very small thing. He didn't hate me. He didn't even know I existed. She unlocked the car. That was worse. It took me a week to understand why it was worse. Delphine stood there with both hands in the pockets of her coat, and for 2 seconds she didn't look like a manager. She looked like someone trying to work out where she stood inside a story larger than herself. Then the wall rose again. I didn't come here to listen to your life story, she said. I know. I came here so you would understand that real people are suffering because of what happened that morning. I understand that now, Marlowe said. He was a real person too. Delphine turned away. She got into her car, slammed the door, reversed too quickly, and nearly struck a light pole. Marlowe watched until the taillights disappeared beyond the fence. Then she got into her own car and drove home, and she arrived before June woke up. But for the next 3 days, Delphine couldn't get one sentence out of her mind. It turned out not to be true. Corbin Ashgrove knew someone was turning over the files before Rafe did, not because anyone had warned him. It was because he had a habit of checking in with the records clerk once a month, casually asking about her family and her children, and during each of those 3-minute conversations, he always slipped in one small question about who had been spending time down there lately. On Monday morning, the records clerk mentioned that the legal office had requested the entire Harbor Row project file, the paper copies, not the scans. She said it with complete innocence, because to her it truly was innocent. Corbin thanked her, asked about her son in college, then ended the call and sat still for 10 minutes. Then he called Rafe. Cousin, Corbin. I heard the Fox Point location had to close. Corbin spoke in the voice of a man sharing a common concern. I looked over the engineer's report. The beam anchor plate. That was a facility maintenance failure, not a defect in the original structure. That building was constructed in 1927. We only lease it. I know. What I meant was, you don't need to worry. This is contained at the location level. I've already had people inspect all 27 of the other sites in the chain. Good. Corbin allowed exactly 2 beats to pass. He always allowed exactly 2 beats before asking the question he truly wanted answered, because he knew people often lowered their guard immediately after answering an easy one. I've heard that Talia's office is pulling the Harbor Row files. Have you? Are you planning to reopen Harbor Row? Rafe was standing beside the glass, looking down at the harbor. He didn't turn around, didn't shift his posture, and didn't lower his voice. Not yet. 2 words. Corbin heard them and smiled. And he smiled because he had worked beside Rafe Solano for 8 years, and knew that the man never said not yet when he meant no. No was no. Not yet meant he was already doing it. I'm asking because auditing will close the books on the old projects at the end of the quarter, Corbin said, his voice still smooth. If there's anything you want preserved, I can have someone separate it early. No need. Then forget I mentioned it. Corbin let one more sentence fall, light as though it meant nothing. Have you seen Mr. Blackwood again? Poor old man. It hasn't been long since he lost his son. I have. Did he say anything? He thanked me for the ride. Corbin laughed softly. You've been very kind to him. Then he wished Rafe a good day and ended the call. He placed the telephone on the desk and sat perfectly still for 30 seconds, without moving, both hands resting face down on the desktop. During those 30 seconds, he rearranged the entire board in his mind. The official Harbor Row file was clean. The final acceptance report had been altered and carried no signature from Quinn. And without a signature, no one could prove who had written what. The termination decision bore Rafe's signature, not his. And that was the part that let him sleep best at night. That left 2 openings. The first was the original load testing data, printed directly from the equipment with machine timestamps, stored among the project's raw technical records. The second was the internal email archive from that period, which had been backed up regularly and retained for 7 years as required. Corbin picked up the telephone and called the basement. Hello, this is Ashgrove. He spoke with the records clerk for 3 minutes, asked about her son once more, and only then came to the point. I need your help with a procedural matter. Auditing requires us to review our storage volume, and you know the capacity regulations are stricter this year. Raw technical materials from projects delivered more than 12 months ago may be destroyed once the official acceptance report has been entered into the record. Yes, there is a regulation allowing that, she said, but we usually keep them longer. I know, and I consider that wasteful. Start with the group of projects delivered last year. Follow the proper forms, sign every destruction record, and don't skip a single step. He gave the final sentence exactly enough emphasis, because he understood that no one questioned something that looked like a procedure being followed with absolute care. How many projects are there? 9. Work through them alphabetically. 9 projects. Harbor Row sat in the middle of the list, neither first nor last. That was the entire art of it. When does it need to be finished? There's no urgency, Corbin said. Sometime this week will be fine. He ended the call. Then he opened his computer, entered the email archive system, and created a storage review request covering every mailbox in the project development division during the 3rd quarter of that year. The request would be approved automatically after 72 hours if no one objected, because it was a perfectly ordinary administrative request, and no one in the building had any reason to object to a perfectly ordinary administrative request. He turned off the screen, straightened his cuffs, and went to his meeting. 3 floors away, Rafe Solano was still standing beside the glass, looking down at the harbor, and he had just finished deciding that there had been nothing in that call worth worrying about. On Wednesday night, Everett Blackwood knocked on the door of a 3rd-floor apartment on the north side of the city. He had taken 2 buses to get there, had asked Rafe for the address over the phone, and had stood on the sidewalk below for 15 minutes before going up because he still wasn't certain he had the right to do this. Marlowe opened the door, and for 2 seconds she didn't recognize him, because he was wearing a different coat and because he wasn't where he was supposed to be. Then she saw the tin box in his hands. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to come so late. It's all right. Please come in. June was sitting at the kitchen table coloring. She looked up, greeted him in a very loud voice, then asked whether he was one of her friend's grandfathers. Everett said no, he was a friend of her mother's. June nodded as though that were a perfectly complete explanation, and returned to her picture. 15 minutes later, she went to bed, and Marlowe closed the bedroom door before sitting across from Everett at the small kitchen table. Would you like some tea? Please sit down. Everett placed the tin box on the table. He rested both hands on the lid and kept them there for a while, exactly as he had held it throughout that morning in the diner. Miss Quinn, I have to tell you something, and I have to tell it in the right order, or you won't believe me. All right. That morning, I wasn't sitting in that diner by chance. Marlowe didn't move. Everett opened the box. There wasn't much inside. A tarnished brass building inspector's badge, with an identification number engraved on the back. A broken piece of concrete the size of a child's fist. Several folded sheets of paper. He took out the page, folded into quarters, worn thin along the creases, opened it on the table, and turned it toward her. Marlowe looked down. 11 names. 10 crossed out. The 11th circled twice in red ink, with 3 hurried words written beside it. Her name. This is my son's handwriting, Everett said. Hollis Blackwood. Marlowe raised her eyes very slowly. The supervising engineer on Harbor Row. You knew him. I worked with him for 10 months. She looked back at the page, and her voice dropped. I didn't know he had died. I was dismissed before that. After I left, I didn't stay in contact with anyone at the company. He died 12 months ago. Everett said it in the level voice of a man who had practiced saying it many times. You were dismissed in the 14th month. 1 month after you left, he filed an internal petition with the legal department, requesting that every record connected to the material changes on 3 projects, including Harbor Row, be preserved. He asked for an independent review. Marlowe placed both hands on the table. Did he say why? He wrote 4 lines in the petition. I know all 4 by heart. Everett took out another sheet, a copy with the ink blurred at one corner. He wrote that the project's final acceptance report didn't reflect the original technical data, that the person who produced the original data had been terminated, that he had signed a document he hadn't read in full, and that he was asking for his own signature to be reviewed. For a while, Marlowe couldn't speak. He reported himself. He told me over the phone the night he filed it, Everett said. He said, "Dad, I signed something because I trusted them when they told me it was all right. I'm going to fix it." I asked whether he needed a lawyer. He said not yet, that it was an internal matter, that they would handle it properly. He stopped. 3 weeks later, he died. Marlowe looked at him. How did he die? Everett didn't answer at once. He looked down at the piece of concrete in the box, turned the box a quarter turn on the table, then turned it back to where it had been. "A traffic accident," he said. "On Route 44, at 10 o'clock at night, in the rain. No other vehicle was involved. The police report was 3 pages long. The conclusion was that he lost control." He lifted his eyes and looked directly at Marlowe. "I've read those 3 pages 40 times. Marlowe waited for him to continue. He didn't. He only closed the lid of the box and rested his hand on it. And in that small kitchen there was a silence both of them understood and neither of them touched. "I don't have any proof," Everett said at last. "I'm a 71-year-old man, and I have nothing in my hands except a sheet of paper with your name on it. So I went looking for you." "For how long?" 4 months. He gave the number without emphasis. "Every Tuesday morning, 17 times. In his file, there was a note in the margin saying you often ate breakfast there after the night shift. That was all I had." Marlowe looked down at her hands. "You sat there for 17 Tuesday mornings. I mistook 4 people for you. Once, I was about to question a woman in work clothes. Then I stopped, because she had 2 children with her, and their family looked peaceful." He gave a brief, joyless smile. "I kept thinking that when I found you, I would lay everything on the table and ask for your help. I practiced my opening words on the bus. I knew them by heart. Then why didn't you say anything?" Everett was silent. "Because you cut your breakfast in half," he said. "You pushed the larger portion toward me and told me you weren't hungry. I sat there with a piece of bread in my mouth and realized that what I intended to place on that table wasn't a request. It was a burden, and the person I meant to place it upon was already carrying too much." He touched the lid of the box. "I went to that diner because my son once sat at table number 9, but I stayed because of you." Marlowe shook her head. "I didn't save you. I only pulled out a chair." "Yes," Everett said. "You pulled out the chair my son had been trying to pull out until the last day of his life. It took Talia Reyes 4 days and 3 nights to trace the entire chain, and she did the work at home instead of at the office, because by the 2nd day she had begun to notice that people were asking about her a little too often. On Friday morning, she called Rafe and said exactly 1 sentence over the phone, that he should come to her place and tell no one where he was going. She spread everything across her dining table. The subcontractor that supplied the reinforcing steel for Harbor Row is called Meridian Bay Supply," she said. "Registered in Rhode Island, established 6 years ago. On paper, it looks ordinary. It has a warehouse, trucks, and employees. Who owns it? This is where the trail takes a detour." Talia placed 3 sheets of paper beside one another. "Meridian Bay is owned by a limited liability company called Kestrel Point Holdings, registered in Delaware. Kestrel Point is owned by another company registered in Nevada. The Nevada company has a single shareholder, and that shareholder is a family trust." She pushed out a 4th page. "The beneficiary of that trust is Renata Ashgrove." Rafe didn't pick up the paper. "Corbin's wife." "Corbin's wife," Talia said. 3 intermediary layers, 2 different states, and a trust established 8 months before Meridian Bay came into existence. This isn't someone accidentally stumbling into a conflict of interest, Rafe. This is someone building the pipeline first, and only then turning on the valve. The amount. Harbor Row alone. Talia opened her notebook. The design specified high-grade, corrosion-resistant reinforcing steel intended for coastal construction. What was delivered was standard-grade steel with no corrosion treatment. The payment records list the price of the high-grade material. The difference between what was paid for and what was delivered is $2,100,000. Rafe sat down. On one project. On one project. Talia tapped one finger against the thickest stack of papers. "And this is the part that has kept me awake for the past 3 nights. I traced every contract Meridian Bay won over 6 years. There were 7 projects. Harbor Row was the 4th. Rafe looked up. "There are 6 more. There are 6 more. I've narrowed them down." Talia spread out a list. 3 don't concern me. 1 is a multi-story parking garage. an open structure with low loads, and it was re-inspected last year for an unrelated reason and passed. The second is a single-story warehouse in the industrial district. The third was canceled halfway through. Only the foundation had been poured, and nothing is standing on it. What about the other three? Talia didn't answer at once. She turned the page toward him and let him read it himself. Rafe read the first line. Cedar Hollow Nursing Center, Chalkstone Street. Completed 4 years ago. 142 beds. The second line. Olneyville Branch Library. Completed 3 years ago. Part of the city library system. The third line. Elmwood Ward Community Health Center. Completed 2 years ago. Outpatient care. Open 6 days a week. Rafe set the page down. He said nothing for a long time. Outside Talia's window, a garbage truck passed, and then the street went quiet again. All three are operating, Talia said. All three used the same supplier for the reinforcing steel package. I don't know what material was actually delivered, because the delivery manifests are in the raw technical records for each project, and those weren't included in the files I was able to pull. All three may have received the correct material. They may not have. What do you think? I'm a lawyer. I don't guess. Talia closed her notebook. But I will say this. If someone took $2,100,000 from the fourth project, it's difficult to believe that on the fifth, sixth, and seventh projects, they suddenly decided to pay full price. Rafe stood and walked 3 steps toward the window. He stood with his back to her. 8 months, he said. 8 months ago, I sat at my mother's dining table and told her I was going to bring everything into the light. Nothing would remain in the shadows. She took my hand, and she couldn't speak, but she squeezed it twice. He turned around. And throughout those 8 months, my cousin was still pulling money out of the steel in buildings where elderly people sleep. Rafe, I know what you're about to say. Good. I'm saying it anyway. Talia stood. You're angry, and when you're angry, you tend to forget that you control only 2 of the 7 seats. If you handle this the way your father would have, tomorrow you'll lose the company. You'll lose any chance of re-inspecting those 3 buildings, and Corbin will become the victim in the eyes of the board. Rafe didn't answer. He was looking down at the list. Cedar Hollow, Olneyville, Elmwood, 142 beds. There's one more thing you need to understand clearly, Talia said. For the past 2 weeks, I kept thinking Corbin altered that report because of the schedule, because of the sales launch date, the contractual penalties, the investors, but now I think differently. Say it. Marlo Quinn didn't ask for the project to be stopped. She asked for 3 days, 72 hours of load testing. Talia looked at him. Do you understand what 72 hours of load testing means? It means the material records have to be opened for comparison. Samples have to be taken. A third party has to stand there and record the figures. And the first question a third party always asks is where this shipment of steel came from and where the mill certificate is. Rafe understood, and he understood very quickly. He wasn't afraid of losing 3 days. No, Talia said. He was afraid of those 3 days. She thought she was arguing over a set of figures. She had no idea she had just aimed a flashlight directly at the place where he had hidden $2,100,000. She gathered the files and placed them in her briefcase. And 11 days later, she walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box. On Monday morning, Rafe called the head of operations to his office and told him to schedule independent structural inspections for 3 facilities, reading each name aloud one by one. The department head wrote them in his notebook, then looked up and hesitated. These 3 aren't properties we currently operate. What do you mean? All 3 have already been turned over to their owners. Cedar Hollow was transferred to a nursing home operating foundation. The library was transferred to the city. The health center was transferred to the ward health department. He turned a page in his notebook. We were the general contractor. Once the projects passed final inspection and the warranty period expired, we no longer had the authority to enter and inspect them on our own. Then, how do we get inside? There are 3 ways. First, the owner invites us in. Second, a government regulatory agency issues an order. Third, our company voluntarily informs the owner that there may be a concern involving work performed under one of our contracts, then requests permission to conduct an inspection at our own expense. The third way means admitting that there may be a problem. The department head said it very quietly. That has to go before the board. Any written statement acknowledging a possible defect in a completed project falls under decisions requiring a vote. The bylaws are explicit because it creates potential insurance liability and civil liability. Rafe sat still. Are you certain? I may be wrong by a word, but I'm not wrong about the meaning. Mr. Ashgrove was the one who revised that section of the bylaws 3 years ago. Rafe thanked him and told him to leave, adding that there was no need to put the conversation on the calendar. He sat alone for 40 minutes. Then he called Talia. She arrived that afternoon, read the bylaws again, checked them 3 times, then set the papers down. He's right. You're tied. I have 2 seats. You have 2 seats, and you need 4. Talia sat down. I think Weston Pryor will stand with you. He worked with your father from the beginning, and he doesn't need anyone's money. Corbin controls the other 3 seats. The 4th man I can't read. Rafe said nothing. And if you bring this before the board now, Talia continued, what do you bring with it? A set of original data I haven't been able to obtain. An altered acceptance report that no one signed. The testimony of a woman this company fired, when the termination decision bears your own signature. Corbin will stand up and say, you're lashing out because of what happened one morning in a diner. The other 3 will nod. Rafe stood and walked to the glass wall. Below, cranes were unloading containers onto the docks. And he knew the name of every crane operator down there. And he knew that if he picked up the telephone, that harbor would stop moving for 2 hours, and the entire city would know who had given the order. He knew other things too. He knew where Corbin ate lunch on Thursdays. He knew who kept the books for Meridian Base Supply, and exactly how much that man owed, and to whom. He knew precisely whom to call, so that within 48 hours, Corbin Ashgrove would carry a file into this office with his own hands, place it on the desk, and apologize for having allowed it to remain misplaced for so long. That way was fast. That way was certain. That was the way his father had done things for 30 years, and it had never failed once. His father had also died in prison at 68. Talia, he said. Go ahead. How long before you can get the original data? I can't get it. She said it plainly. I requested the raw technical records for Harbor Row last week. This morning, Archives replied that the files are currently part of a procedural storage review and are temporarily unavailable for retrieval. The paperwork is complete. There are signatures. The proper forms were used. Rafe turned around. Who approved the review? Project Development. The room remained silent for a long time. Rafe looked down at his right hand. On his ring finger was a thick silver band with a smooth face and no engraving. His father had worn it for 40 years, and it had been returned to Rafe in a paper envelope, along with a watch and a pair of eyeglasses. He turned it halfway around with his thumb. 8 months ago, I sat beside my mother's bed, he said. She couldn't speak anymore. I told her I would bring everything into the light, and that I would never do things the way my father did. She squeezed my hand twice. I know, Talia said. You've told me 3 times. Were you going to remind me? No, Talia said. You remember it better than I do. If you needed me to remind you, then you would have already made your decision. Rafe stood there, turning the ring, and thought about the 142 beds at Cedar Hollow. He thought about how one telephone call could settle everything before the end of the week. He thought about how, if he made that call, he would still save the 3 buildings, and he would lose only one thing, the promise he had made to a woman who was no longer there, to know whether he kept it. Then he thought about a woman sitting in a lawyer's office, and saying that if the data met the standard, she would sign, and if it didn't, she wouldn't, even if signing was the only way to get her profession back. Rafe took his hand away from the ring. We do this with paper, he said. Talia nodded. Then I need one more person. Who do you need? I need the manager who was on duty that morning, she said. And I need her to tell the truth. Corbin came to Grayson and Fern on Saturday morning, while the diner was closed for reinforcement work. He let himself in with his own access card and walked straight to the back office, where Delphine Ward was sitting and checking inventory because it was the only work they still allowed her to do. He pulled out a chair, sat across from her, and asked about her mother. He knew her mother was ill. He had no reason to know that, but he did. And he asked in the voice of someone who genuinely cared, and Delphine answered that she was about the same. Miss Ward, I'm going to speak plainly, because I respect you. Corbin placed a stack of papers on the table. The review concerning you is moving in the wrong direction, and I believe that is because the board has heard only half the story. Delphine looked at the papers. "This is a statement," Corbin said. "I had someone prepare the background for you because I know you don't have an attorney. Read it. Correct anything that isn't accurate." Delphine pulled the papers toward her. She read the first page, then the second, and gradually began reading more slowly. It stated that on the morning in question, a woman who wasn't an employee had interfered with the building structure without authorization, directed staff to carry out inspection procedures for which they had no professional license, disrupted business operations, and caused panic among the customers. The third page stated that the woman had deliberately approached an elderly customer with ties to senior management, and that the incident had been used to establish a personal relationship. Delphine set the papers down. "That isn't what happened." "Which part isn't?" "None of it happened that way." She pushed the statement back to the middle of the table. "She didn't touch the beam. She didn't touch anything at all." She placed a coin on a table. "Then she directed your employee. Sadie climbed up on her own. I told Sadie not to climb, and she did it anyway." "Then that makes it even more accurate," Corbin said gently. "Your employee disobeyed you after listening to an outsider. Do you understand how that sounds?" Delphine remained silent. "And Mr. Blackwood?" She invited him to sit down first. "Before what?" "Before anyone knew who he was." Delphine said the words and heard herself saying them. "Before Mr. Solano walked in. I was standing at the counter. I saw everything." Corbin nodded slowly, as though he were considering the matter with great seriousness. Then he leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table, and lowered his voice, and there wasn't the slightest trace of a threat in it. "Miss Ward, you've worked here for 4 years. You have a mortgage, and you're taking care of your mother. I'm not saying that to remind you. I'm saying it because I've read your file, and I can see that you're capable." He paused. "This review isn't about the beam. The beam is a facility maintenance issue. Everyone knows that. This review is about judgment. The board will sit down and decide one question, and one question only: whether your judgment can still be trusted." He pushed the statement toward her. "A complete account will help them understand the pressure you were under that morning. It wasn't a threat. Not one word of it was a threat. It didn't need to be." "I need time," Delphine said. "You don't have much." Corbin stood, straightened his cuffs, and asked about her mother one more time before leaving. On Sunday, Talia Reyes sat in the facility's security room and reviewed the footage from that morning, beginning at 6 o'clock. 2 cameras, a total of 4 hours and 10 minutes. She watched it twice and wrote the timestamps on paper. 7:02, Everett Blackwood entered and sat at table number 9. 7:26, Marlo Quinn entered and sat at the neighboring table. 8:11, Delphine Ward approached table number 9. 8:14, Everett stood. 8:15, Marlo pulled out the chair. 8:52, Marlo left her seat, walked to the table in the corner, and placed a small object on its surface. 9:01, Sadie Kovach brought out a ladder. 9:03, Sadie climbed it. During the entire 4 hours and 10 minutes of footage, Marlo Quinn didn't touch the column, the wall, the beam, or any structural component, even once. She didn't go near the ladder, and Rafe Solano walked through the door at 9:17, 1 hour and 2 minutes after Marlo pulled out the empty chair. On Monday morning, Talia invited Delphine to her office and turned on the recorder. Delphine began with Corbin's version. She said that an outsider had interfered with the operation of the facility, that one of her employees had acted under the outsider's direction, that she had tried to maintain order in a situation someone else had pushed beyond her control. She spoke for about 4 minutes. Then she stopped in the middle of a sentence. Talia didn't ask anything. She simply waited. Delphine sat still with both hands resting in her lap, and she was thinking about a morning in the printing plant parking lot, and about a sentence she hadn't been able to remove from her mind for 10 days. It turned out not to be true. "Miss Reyes," she said. "Yes. Can I start again from the beginning?" "You can start again as many times as you need." Delphine opened her handbag and took out the statement Corbin had left on her table. She set it down, turned it around, and pushed it across the desk. "Mr. Ashgrove gave me this on Saturday," she said. "He wanted me to state that Miss Quinn interfered with the structure. She didn't touch anything at all. I was there, and I know." "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly." "What did he say?" "He said the board would decide whether my judgment could still be trusted." Delphine looked directly at the recorder. "I was wrong about Mr. Blackwood. I looked at his coat, and decided who he was. No one forced me to do that. I did it myself. She pushed the statement a little farther across the desk. I'm not going to sign another lie just to protect myself. The meeting began at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning in the 12th floor conference room. 7 chairs surrounded the table. Rafe sat at the head, Corbin at the far end. Weston Pryor, 68 years old, who had worked with Rafe's father since the 1980s, sat on the left. The other 3 were Halloran, Bracu, and Nardone. Talia sat against the wall with her computer. Marlowe had been invited to answer technical questions, and she wore the cleanest shirt she owned, the same one she had worn to Talia's office. Everett sat beside her with the tin box resting on his lap. Talia presented for 40 minutes, in order. The acceptance report in the official file, the original data she hadn't been able to obtain because it was caught in a storage review initiated by the Project Development Division. Meridian Bay Supply. 3 layers of intermediary companies. The trust bearing Renata Ashgrove's name. 7 projects. Security footage with timestamps. The prepared statement Corbin had given Delphine Ward and Delphine's recorded testimony. When Talia finished, Halloran spoke first. Miss Reyes, do you have the original data in your possession? Not yet. Then the entire first portion is speculation. It is a gap in the record, sir, and I have explained clearly why that gap exists. Weston Pryor turned toward Marlowe. Miss Quinn? Yes. I want to ask you 3 questions, and I want brief answers. Yes, sir. Has the Harbor Row structural system been proven unsafe? No. Has it been proven stable under full operational loads? No. What did you refuse to sign? A statement saying the data demonstrated structural stability. Why? Because it didn't. Pryor leaned back. Thank you. Corbin set down his pen. He didn't speak loudly, and he addressed the entire table rather than Marlowe. I believe we're overlooking the operational context. Harbor Row was a $14 million project with a publicly announced sales launch date, contracts with 32 advance purchasers, and late delivery penalties. Miss Quinn wasn't wrong in a purely technical sense. She simply failed to place her technical question within the context the rest of us had to live in. He turned toward her. You delayed a $14 million project. The structure delayed the project, Marlowe said. I was only the person who read what it was telling us. You could have respected the chain of command. I followed the proper internal grievance procedure. I submitted my concerns in writing, waited the full required period, and spoke to no one outside the company. You challenged an executive judgment in front of the contractor. I answered an acceptance question in front of the people conducting the acceptance process, Marlowe said. That was why I was there. Corbin gave a faint smile, and something he had held back for 40 minutes finally slipped through it. Miss Quinn, you have always believed that your technical opinion mattered more than the needs of this company. The entire table went silent. Marlowe looked directly at him. Refusing to certify something that hasn't been verified isn't disloyalty. She paused. It's the job. Corbin drew back. He knew he had made a mistake, and he did what men like him always did when they made one. He diminished the person who had exposed it. We need to keep this in proportion, he said to the table. We are sitting here, a 7-member board, weighing the word of a second-class technician who left this company 14 months ago and now works the night shift for a cleaning company. A chair scraped backward. Everett Blackwood stood. He rose slowly, one hand braced against the edge of the table, and placed the tin box on the surface in front of him. I would like permission to speak for 1 minute, he said. Pryor nodded. My name is Everett Blackwood. I worked as a building inspector for the city of Providence for 31 years. I have been retired for 8. He opened the box, took out the tarnished brass badge, and placed it on the table. During those 31 years, I signed approvals for more than 400 structures in this city. Schools, churches, apartment buildings, and 1 pedestrian overpass. He looked around the table. I'm not standing to defend Miss Quinn. I don't have that right. I have never worked beside her for a single day. He rested his hand on the badge. I only want to say one thing. Of those 400 approvals, there was exactly 1 time when I signed something without inspecting it in person. 1993. They told me someone else had already inspected it, that only the paperwork remained, that the project was behind schedule. He stopped. That building is still standing today. 33 years later, it is still standing, and it will probably stand longer than I will. He picked up the badge and returned it to the box. but I haven't slept properly since. Not from that day to this one." He sat down. No one spoke for 10 seconds. Then Halloran cleared his throat and proposed that they move to a vote. Talia had drafted the motion, and it was read aloud word for word. Authorization for the executive office to issue written notices of suspected material defects to the owners of 3 completed properties, and to request permission to conduct independent structural inspections at the company's expense. Rafe voted in favor. Weston Pryor voted in favor. Talia had no vote. The third vote in favor came from Nardone, which Rafe hadn't expected at all, and Nardone looked at no one when he raised his hand. Corbin voted against. Halloran voted against. Bracu voted against. And the 7th seat, the one Talia had said she couldn't read, voted against as well. 4-3. Corbin didn't smile. That was what Marlowe remembered most clearly about that moment afterward, that he didn't smile at all. He simply picked up his pen, wrote one line in his notebook, and said in the voice of a man concluding an ordinary meeting that he welcomed the board's careful consideration and that the executive office should focus on the priorities already approved. Rafe sat at the head of the table and said nothing. He had done it through paper, exactly as he had promised, and paper had just lost. He raised his eyes toward the far end of the room, and Marlowe Quinn was looking at him. Corbin didn't wait until morning. At 7 o'clock that evening, an internal notice was issued by the Project Development Division, citing the resolution that had just passed and the company bylaws, temporarily suspending all retrieval of materials connected to completed projects until the storage review was finished. At 8 o'clock, the basement archive access cards of 4 people were deactivated, including Talia Reyes's. At 9 o'clock, Talia received an email informing her that because she had served as the presenting party in a matter the board had already resolved by vote, she was being placed on paid leave during an internal review of the scope of her work. The letter was written very politely. It bore the signature of Human Resources, not Corbin's. Talia called Rafe and said 3 sentences. "The archive is locked. I've been placed on leave. Don't call me back from a company phone." The next 3 days were the longest 3 days of Rafe Solano's life. He still went to the office. He still attended meetings. He still signed the things that needed signing. And this time he read every word. But each time he passed the stairwell leading down to the basement, he thought about the 142 beds at Cedar Hollow, and he knew that somewhere beneath his feet, the papers that might answer that question were being placed into boxes according to proper procedure, with signatures and fully completed destruction forms. On Saturday evening, Everett Blackwood called Marlowe and asked whether she was home. He arrived at 7 o'clock, and this time Rafe came with him, and both men waited outside the door until June had gone to bed. Then they sat down at the small kitchen table. Everett placed the tin box on the table. "Miss Quinn," he said, "I owe you an apology." Marlowe looked at him. At the meeting, Miss Reyes said her office hadn't been able to obtain the original data. Everett rested both hands on the lid of the box. "I sat there and heard her say it, and I said nothing. I remained silent for the entire 40 minutes. Mr. Blackwood, please let me finish." He opened the lid. He took out the badge and set it aside. He removed the piece of concrete. He took out the folded papers. Then he turned the box upside down, tapped lightly against the bottom, and slipped his fingernail into a narrow gap along the inner edge. The fabric-covered cardboard lining, something anyone holding the box would have assumed was part of the box itself, came loose from the bottom. Beneath it was a craft envelope folded in half. Rafe sat straighter. Everett placed the envelope on the table and didn't open it immediately. "1 week before my son died," he said. "He came to my house one evening and gave me this. He told me, 'Dad, keep this for me.' I asked what it was. He said it was a printout of the raw data from the Harbor Row load testing equipment. The version with the machine timestamps, along with the delivery manifest for the steel shipment and photographs of the stamped code on each bar." He looked down at the envelope. I asked why he hadn't given it to the company. He said he already had, and that this was his copy. Then he said, "Dad, if anything happens, don't give this to anyone inside the company." No one in the kitchen spoke. 3 weeks later, he died, Everett said. And I sat with this envelope for an entire year. I didn't know whom to give it to. I didn't know who inside that company belonged to him and who belonged to someone else. I'm 71 years old, and I was afraid that if I handed it to the wrong person, the only thing my son had left behind would disappear into a paper shredder. He pushed the envelope to the middle of the table. "Now I know," Marlo didn't touch it. She stared at it for a long time. Then she opened it, drew out the stack of papers, and read the first page, and Rafe saw her shoulders lower slightly. "This is the machine printout," she said. "The full cycle. It has the timestamps." She turned a page. "This is my handwriting in the margin. I remember writing this at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because it was hot, and I had to wipe my hand before holding the pen." She turned another page, then stopped. "The delivery manifest. It has the shipment code. It has Meridian Bay's name." She went to the final page. Photographs of the stamped codes on the steel bars, taken clearly, with a ruler placed beside them. She set the papers down. "What does this prove?" Rafe asked. "It proves that the material delivered wasn't the material specified in the design," Marlo said. "And it proves that the dataset in the official acceptance report isn't this dataset." Rafe reached for his telephone. Then he stopped. "The board has already voted," he said slowly. "I don't have the authority to issue a disclosure notice. I don't have the authority to request an inspection. I don't have the authority to transfer company records outside the company. I lost all 3 of those powers on Thursday." Marlo looked up. "You don't." He looked at her. "But I do," she said. "I'm not your employee. I didn't sign any confidentiality provision that remains in effect. You terminated everything when you dismissed me. I still hold a valid second-class state inspection certification. A certificate holder has the right to submit a suspected structural safety report directly to the State Building Safety Commission." She placed her hand on the papers. "I don't need permission from your board. I only need my name and my seal." Rafe immediately understood what that meant. It meant the commission would come in. It meant they wouldn't stop with the 3 buildings. They would open every Solano Holdings contracting file from the past 6 years, and then they would go farther back, into the years when his father was still alive, into the contracts Rafe had spent 8 years trying to clean up, and still hadn't finished cleaning. That light wouldn't shine only on Corbin. It would shine on everything bearing the Solano name. He placed his right hand on the table. The silver ring touched the wood with a faint sound. He remained that way for about 10 seconds. Then he stood. "I'll go with you," he said. Marlo looked at him. "You understand they'll open everything. I understand, including what came before you." "Especially that," Rafe said. Marlo's phone vibrated on the table. She glanced down. It was a message from the neighbor who watched June in the evenings, sent at 7:20, with a photograph attached. The photograph showed a drawing made with colored pencils, a tall building with many columns, more columns than any building needed, each one a different color. Beneath it was a line written unevenly in red crayon, "The Strong Building, by June." Marlo looked at the picture, and she smiled. On Monday morning, Marlo Quinn walked into the headquarters of the Rhode Island State Building Safety Commission with a file in her briefcase and her professional certificate in her coat pocket. Rafe Solano went with her, sat in the waiting area for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and when they called his name, he went in alone and answered every question they asked, including the ones about years when he hadn't yet been part of the company. The commission entered Cedar Hollow the following day. The inspection results took 10 weeks. All 3 buildings were found to be missing the corrosion-resistant treatment specified in their designs. All 3 were placed under mandatory reinforcement at the expense of Solano Holdings, and all 3 were fully reinforced before the end of spring without closing for a single day and without any incident occurring. The investigation confirmed the entire operation. Meridian Bay Supply, 3 intermediary layers, the trust bearing Renata Ashgrove's name, and a total price difference of more than $9 million across 7 projects. Corbin Ashgrove was stripped of every position, lost his inherited financial interest, and his case was referred to the federal prosecutor's office. 3 board members found to hold interests in Kestrel Point Holdings submitted their resignations within the same week. The Solano Family Trust was dissolved early by order of the probate court, and Rafe regained control of his own company. Talia Reyes returned to work, and her only request upon returning was permission to rewrite the document retention section of the bylaws. Marlo Quinn's personnel record was formally corrected. The new statement said that her technical objection had been valid, that the acceptance report in the file had been altered without the preparer's consent, and that her termination had been retaliatory. A settlement was signed restoring her salary, health insurance, and every retirement contribution she had lost during those 14 months. Rafe offered her the position of Director of Structural Safety for the corporation. Marlo declined. She told him she didn't want to walk into a room where everyone knew she was there because someone felt guilty about what had happened to her. Instead, she accepted a 30-day independent evaluation contract, inspected 4 facilities, wrote reports, and presented her findings before a hiring panel with no one bearing the Solano name seated on it. At the end of the process, she was hired as a regional safety inspection supervisor. It didn't make her rich. It gave her stable hours, insurance for June, and work she could sign her name to, without sacrificing what that name meant. Delphine Ward lost her management authority for 6 months and was required to complete retraining in customer relations. Corbin had pressured her, and that fact was fully documented in the record. But no one had forced her to look at an old coat and decide who the person wearing it was. That choice had been hers, and she said exactly that at the hearing. She cooperated with the investigation from beginning to end, and she wrote a letter of apology to Everett Blackwood, in which she never once asked to be forgiven. Sadie Kovash was promoted to assistant manager. On Corbin's final day in the building, he encountered Marlowe in the 12th floor corridor. Without power around him, he looked far older than he had on the day he sat at the far end of the conference table. They stopped. "I thought you were trying to humiliate me," he said. "I was only trying not to sign a false report. I know that now. Knowing doesn't undo it." "No," he said, "but what you do next might." He asked for nothing back. He continued cooperating with the investigation and returned everything they required. Everett Blackwood began visiting. At first, it was only dinner. Then it was the school music performance, then the science fair, where June built a cardboard building nearly as tall as she was, with far too many columns. And when the judges asked why it had so many, she answered with complete seriousness that the columns had to be straight for the building to stand, because she had tested it, and when they bent, it fell down. Everett laughed louder than anyone in the room. One evening, he sat at Marlowe's kitchen table polishing the tarnished brass badge with a soft cloth. June climbed onto the chair beside him to watch. "Grandpa Everett, you missed a spot." The entire kitchen fell silent. June looked up, suddenly worried. "Is it all right if I call you that?" His hand stopped over the badge. "Yes," he whispered. "More than all right." Solano Holdings restored the meal assistance fund Hollis Blackwood had once created, and that had been abandoned after his death. Customers facing hardship could ask for help discreetly at the counter. No one had to explain their circumstances in front of a crowded room. No one was filmed for advertising. A small brass bowl was placed beside the register at every location. Customers could contribute to it, and the company matched the full amount each month. The first bowl was placed at the Fox Point location. Several months after the morning that changed everything, 4 people returned to Grayson and Fern. The weather was cold but sunny. Delphine came all the way to the door. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood." "Good morning, Miss Quinn." She looked at June. "Which table would you like?" "Table number 9, please." They sat at table number 9. Marlowe ordered 4 full breakfasts, blueberry pancakes for Everett, and when the food arrived, June looked at the table and laughed. "There's so much more than last time." Marlowe nodded. "Things are better now, sweetheart." June looked toward the brass bowl beside the counter. Next to it was a folded card, printed with a single line. "No one should have to prove they deserve a hot meal." She slid down from her chair, went to the empty table beside them, pulled one chair over, and pushed it in next to their table. Marlowe raised an eyebrow. "What is that for?" "In case someone needs it." A few minutes later, the door opened. A young woman entered alone, wearing a thin coat, her hands red from the cold. She stood beside the counter, stared at the menu for a long time, and didn't sit down. June looked at her mother. Marlowe looked at Everett. Everett looked at Rafe. Rafe Solano stood. The most powerful man in the room pulled the empty chair away from the table and waved the young woman toward table number 9. Dignity isn't something people should have to prove before they're allowed to receive it. It already lives within every person from the moment they walk through the door. On some mornings, all a human being needs isn't money or advice, but simply another person willing to pull out a chair and say there is still room here. And the strange thing is that the chair is often pulled out by those who have the least, the people who understand best what it feels like to stand outside. If this story touched you, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can continue listening to meaningful stories together every day, and share it with someone who once had to walk out of a room in silence. How did today's story make you feel? If someone has ever pulled out a chair for you, or if you have ever pulled one out for a stranger, please leave a comment below. We truly want to hear what is in your heart. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.